Quiet, quiet, friends. I have a tale to tell before the tavern closes tonight. I have come a very long way and seen so many places. I've heard many stories, and am happy to be here now to share them with you. So gather round. Last I was here, I told you of the old sorcerer Florian, but this night I want to tell you of a more modern spellcaster, and the magic you may see used these days all around the world. Where Florian's battle magic was made of fire and lightning and the calling of wolves, modern sorcerers have their own ways of protecting themselves. And while their connection to the world, its elements and its creatures, is still truly great, a modern mage's greatest skill is tied to the moon. This story begins in the east, in a vast port city named Kirk, where a young elf was born. He had black hair and orange eyes like those of a wolf. His father was a sailor, and his mother had taken ill, so the boy was left alone before he had even learned his name. He was taken in by the chantry of Kirk, who raised him with care, and raised him to follow their tenets and their gods. They named him Gilbert, Gil to his friends. However, in his youth, wandering the pews of the cathedral, his eyes always lingered on a statue far separated from the 5 divines of Kirk. The statue was made of dark stone, and depicted a man, knelt down wearing a heavy cloak. One of his hands had been removed, but in the other he held a staff. The choristers told Gil that the statue was of Oremund, the dark god of magicians, spellcasters, demons, and destruction. For you see, my friends, in the East magic is strictly outlawed. The unending war against demons from across the sea has caused the pious and religious people of the eastern shore to abhor and despise the mystical arts. However, Gil could not understand why. In his studies and the scrolls and songs of his chantry, magic always seemed like such a strong and useful tool. He would watch the rain fall and wonder about what a magician was truly capable of. As he aged, he began to show signs of magical talent. An easy kinship with mice and the ability to go days without sleep marked him as a fountain of little magic. So the chantry detained him, the son they had reared. They imprisoned him in the Filon din Kirk, a massive tower filled with magicians and heretics who are supposed to await trial. However, most die of starvation or brutality long before they can ever see a magistrate. When one is brought to the Filon, they are often forced to renounce their magic so they can't use it to escape, using their own little magic to cut themselves off from their gift. Only 16 years old, and Gil felt betrayed. And although he did not know much about magic, he knew that it was his gift to keep. On his way to the Filon, he struggled against his bindings and ran, cuffed at the wrists, turning down alleys and side streets. The torrential rain helped to hide his tracks, but the cold wind was bone-chilling. He ran out of the city, tears streaming down his face as his feet carried him mindlessly through the plains. When his feet could no longer lead him, he collapsed. He did not know how long it took for someone to find him, but as he opened his eyes and looked towards the sky, he saw above him a group of people wearing long, flowing cloaks of a greenish blue. They are known as Din Ipostet dis Merin, or the Apostates of Marianne. They are free magicians, who have learned their magic in secret out in the plains and woods of the eastern nations. They took Gil in, fed him, helped him to recover, and once he explained his situation, they began to teach him their magic. He learned to make potions and spell bottles. They guided him through controlling his magic and communicating with the natural forces of the world. They taught him swordsmanship and tactics, as a wise spellcaster does not always rely on their magic. Once he was old enough, they decided to teach him one of the most potent forms of magic known to modern men. They told him that fire, wind, lightning, and earth were powerful tools and ones he should always rely on. But the most powerful magic is the harnessing of moonlight itself. With it he could cast as clerics do, summoning weapons of pure light, shielding himself and others. Once he knew the power of stars, his font would emerge. Now, he did not know what a font was, but he was certain it would be an easy skill to learn. Many young magicians are known to be arrogant, but the weeks turned to months, and the months into years. He could not hear the whispers of the stars no matter how deeply he listened, or how much magic was coursing through his spirit. It had been easy for him to hear the elements of the land, but the stars seemed to evade him. He resigned himself to leave the apostates, wandering north in search of his own path to control the light of the stars. He walked for days, the constant rain becoming snow, but as luck guided his feet, he found a large tournament ground at the edge of the plains. There he saw hundreds of tents, knights of many creeds, and a crowd of hundreds. He asked those around him, and they told him he had reached the Tournament of Trees, a yearly contest of arms that is available to any who would like to be officially recognized as a soldier of renown. Any can enter, knights sworn to lords and knights sworn to their friends. Gil was confident he could win such a contest, and something in his heart called him to try, so he went to sign up. He was given a tabard of white and blue. Blue is the color of the Eastern nations, and white is the color of a knight unsworn. He was given the title Gil the Unbowing, which he quite liked the sound of. Magic had not yet been banned in the Tournament of Trees, although that would soon change, as Gil won his matches with ease, an arming sword in one hand, and his left hand free for guiding his magic of the land. He would raise rocks to protect his weaker side, wind to disorient and push his opponents, and mice to spy on those opponents between rounds so he could learn their weaknesses. Days passed of Gil fighting and winning every single match. Late into the tournament, the final battle, he was faced with a woman named Reba of Belgravelt, whose story is deserving of its own night. However, she was a far better warrior than Gil, and he knew this. She was accomplished in combat, and many had told Gil that she had killed many mages in her life. His simple tricks would not win him the final bout. The tournament's arbiter had chosen to host that final fight at midnight, and Gil considered running away. However, he chose to stay. Win or lose, he wanted to be honorable. As the two squared off, he noticed just how well armored the human woman was, with almost full plate armor and chainmail guarding her joints. She held a one-handed sword and a shield. Her banner was one of red and black fabric, with the face of a bear as her symbol. She was the most unnerving threat Gil had ever faced. Then the battle began, and Reba of Belgravelt was truly a better fighter. The maneuvering of her sword was rapid, and any time it seemed she was on the back foot, she would thrust her shield forward into Gil's face, causing his ears to ring and his nose to break. He would try to call stones to trip her or protect him, but she was simply faster. He even attempted to call flames to chase her from the torches around the proving ground, but he couldn't concentrate. He tried to keep up, parrying her strikes and attempting to counter, but with one strike of her sword's pommel to his jaw, he collapsed, laying face up in the snow. Reba turned to call upon the excitement of the crowd, kicking Gil's sword away from his hand, bragging as she hammered her sword against her shield. If Gil was paying attention, it would have irked him. However, his eyes were fixated on the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. The clouds had parted, and above him was the infinite black of night, the full moon hanging above him, the stars dancing in the abyss. For the first time he heard the whispering of the cosmos, not just the land he knew, but the most imperceptible quiet, singing a song of truth that can only be heard by the quietest of souls. He looked to the stars and whispered, "Tell me everything." Though he was only down for a moment, Reba did not notice him stagger to his feet. He looked down at his hand, and the crowd began to gasp. Reba turned around to see the beaten and bloodied elf, hands shaking as sparks of light began to drift towards his palm as a longsword began to form of sparking orange light. It was the perfect weight. It whispered to him the perfect movements to make and the best targets to aim for. His font was war, his bolts of light shaped as arrows, his moonlight-formed armor to protect his body, and from that moment his magic would always take the form of weapons of war and tools of knighthood. For you see, a font is the perfect reflection of a magician's soul. A magician who truly loves the earth will form moonlight into cyan birds and flowers. A magician who's made of fury and malice will have infernos of a glowing hollow red light. A magician whose only true love is themselves will form moonlight into yellow images of their own visage. Not wanting to give Gil a moment, Reba of Belgravelt rushed towards him, but he listened to the whispers of the moon, kneeling at the perfect moment to get under her guard and force her aside. She advanced again, taking a low swing with her one-handed sword, but instinctively his hands adjusted on the hilt to guard his hip, before sending his pommel directly into the side of her helmet. They battled for 2 hours straight, before the arbiter called the fight. He chose to award them both with the title of Hedge Knight. They would each get their own new device and banner, and land wherever they would want. Magic was banned from the tournament, but Gil had done what he had wanted. He rushed back to the south to see the apostates, and on the road came across one of their number, wounded and weeping under a tree. The young man's name was Elias, and he told Gil that the chantry of Kirk had come for the apostates, and ambushed him in the wilderness before heading off towards their camp. Gil knelt beside Elias and bid his wounds to heal faster, a small glowing plate of armor forming over the injury and suturing it together. The two then ran off towards the apostates' camp, seeing smoke rising in the distance. The chantry of Kirk had brought 40 men to slaughter and capture the apostates, and as they approached, Gil drank his Star Watcher's brew, in a fit of rage throwing one hand skyward and causing a volley of glowing orange arrows to cloud the sky, redirecting in the air to perfectly hit and eliminate many of the chantry's men. The remaining soldiers drew their swords and charged the two boys, but Gil summoned his magic and shaped it into a single-handed sword and shield, expertly repelling and battling 2 men as Elias ran around the outskirts, forging magic into the forms of pure beams of light to launch at his enemies and burn them away, as Elias truly is a person of pure light. They called wolves from the forest to aid them. Gil caused lightning to arc from the clouds and strike anyone who dare attempt to approach Elias, all while fighting with the expert prowess of a knight. The 2 magicians had won the day. However, the forces of the Inquisition would always be a problem for them. Die Apostates d'Ismarien settled on the land that Gil had won in the tournament, taking the banner of a helmet on a blue and gray field as theirs, protecting the land Gil had won with fervor as they built a town upon the very spot. Eposhtet. In the center of town they built a great tower, now known as the Battle Mage's Tower, and there they stored magical knowledge and trained young magicians in the arts of the land and the arts of the cosmos. Gil and Elias married, promising themselves and their service to one another, binding their spirits together with little magic. Years passed. The unending onslaught from the Chantry of Kirk and its Inquisition forces was getting harder and harder to bear. So Gil made a bold decision. He bid Elias goodbye and went to the walls of Kirk. He shouted, demanding entrance to the city and an audience with not only the king, but the choristers of the Chantry as well. Days passed. The king would send out knights to challenge Gil to single combat, but without fail the magician bested them, even refusing to use magic in most fights, just to show how truly martially gifted he was. After 40 days, the gates finally opened to him. Gil left his weapons behind and met in the center of the city with the nobility and the Chantry. There he bellowed his piety to them, how even after being betrayed by the men he called his family for the gift of his magic, he still prayed to their gods. He recited chants and prayers from memory, fury burning in his eyes but calm cloaking him. After hours of his preaching, his speech being heard by many in the city who came to listen, he finally made his point. Battle Mage Tower would stand. Kirk would no longer burn and slaughter its magically gifted, but instead would send them to him, to his tower, to train and to learn. In return, him and the apostates would aid in the war against the demons across the sea, but if any magician was killed by the crown, he would come to claim it. The church and the king reluctantly agreed, and that uneasy alliance continues to this day. Gil keeps a watchful eye on the Chantry that betrayed him, and the king that forsake him, taking in all magically gifted people and their families. Battle Mage Tower now sits on one end of the only magician's monastery in the east, with 12 spires and libraries numbering into the 50s. Gil and Elias oversee the university, teaching courses on little magic, the conjuring of the cosmos, the use of the elements, and the whispering of beasts. Once a year, in early winter, when the demons rise as they always do, Gil kisses his husband goodbye, and wanders to the coast with any mages that feel the call to fight against the demon horde. Though not all kingdoms in the east want the help of magicians, Gil and his battle mages have proven to be one of the most useful forces in the war, conjuring pure moonlight weapons and spells that can cut through a demon far easier than most swords. Gil will never forgive the kingdoms of the East for their treatment of those who are born different. But he hopes, some would say foolishly, that one day his contributions to the war against the darkness will one day change the minds of foolish men. When I met Gil, he was freshly home from the campaign. They had lost 89 magicians that year to demons, and Gil's eyes had faded from the sparkling eyes that he had as a young knight. However, he still allowed me to wander the monastery of Eposhtet, and there I read books on the subjects of magic. Gil wandered the grounds, his eyes always on the horizon with a look of sorrow in his gaze. I once asked him if he thought his agreement with the kingdom of Kirk was foolish, and he nodded, a soft sigh leaving his lips. He craved so deeply for the freedom of his people that in a way he changed out their shackles for a slightly nicer pair. He loves his home and his people, but in securing them their lives he swore them into service to lords who do not care if they live or die. I saw him weep. The stalwart knight magician of the East brought to tears as he told me this: "Compromise in the moments when you can, but never bend the knee to monstrous men. If you can fight, you have no other option than to do so." He is still there today, to my knowledge. My heart breaks every day for the magicians who choose to fight for the kingdom of Kirk. One day, one fine sunny day, maybe a young mage will break those shackles, and magicians will be free to wander Kirk as they once did. But old chains can prove hard to shatter. There are lands where magicians are treated like everyone else, and places where magicians are deeply sought and cherished. One day, I will tell you of those places, but I will never forget the battle mages of Eposhtet, and I have many of their stories to tell you. However, next we meet, I think I will begin to tell you of the Cataclysm, the great event that caused endless storms and the demonic hordes to rise across the sea. I have teased it enough, and it's only right you should know. We will talk of the early days, and we will talk about the life of a survivor who fought to escape the collapse of the Empire, a matriarch of my own family who survived the worst the world could offer and settled here, in Belgravelt, in the Waywind Mountains. I have a tome of tales from every nation to share with you all. I have seen many monsters, many heroes. I have learned of the magic offered by the goddess, and the magic humans can conjure for themselves. I have seen warfare, and I have tales of peace. I cannot wait to tell them all to you. Good night, and thank you.
Legends of Lorelei is a narrative fiction podcast by Livewire Multimedia Stories. The Bard is voiced by Gwen Fullman. Written by Gwen Fullman. Co-executive produced by Gwen Fullman and Elizabeth Fullman. With music by Gwen Fullman. If you enjoyed what you just listened to, please consider contributing to our Patreon. If you would like updates on this project or any of our other projects, come follow us on Instagram at Livewire Multimedia, on Tumblr at Livewire Media, or subscribe to us on YouTube at Livewire Multimedia Stories. Thank you for listening.